Jack Thunder Morrison had seen every kind of trouble the road could offer in his 23 years with the Hells Angels. But nothing prepared him for the innocent voice of a 7-year-old girl at Miller's Diner on Highway 87. As he sat nursing black coffee and studying the rain through grimy windows, small fingers pointed at the winged skull tattoo covering his forearm. "Hello, sir. My older sister has that tattoo too," she chirped, with the fearless curiosity of childhood. The words hit Jack like a freight train. His sister Sarah had vanished 15 years ago, leaving behind only questions and a matching tattoo they'd gotten together on her 18th birthday. The family had given up searching long ago, but this child's casual observation cracked open wounds Jack thought had scarred over permanently. What if Sarah was still alive? And this little girl held the key to finding her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack's hands shook as he pushed through the motel room door, the rusty hinges groaning like old bones. The encounter at the diner had left him feeling like he'd been sucker-punched by a ghost. He collapsed onto the sagging bed, his leather jacket creaking as he reached for the worn wallet in his back pocket. Sarah's letter lived behind his driver's license. Folded so many times the creases had worn thin as tissue paper. He'd memorized every word years ago, but still pulled it out when the pain of losing her became unbearable. Tonight, that pain felt fresh as an open wound. "Jackie," the letter began in her careful handwriting, "by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I can't explain everything, but I need you to know this isn't your fault. The people I got mixed up with, they're dangerous in ways I never imagined. If I stay, everyone I love will suffer. Someday, when the sun sets differently and the shadows change, maybe we'll find each other again. Until then, remember our promise by the old oak tree. Your loving sister, Sarah. P.S. Look for me where the eagles nest and the water runs backward." Jack traced the words with a calloused finger, just as he had countless times before. Tonight, though, the cryptic ending seemed less like poetic nonsense and more like a roadmap he'd been too grief-stricken to decipher. The knock on his door came at exactly 10 p.m., Miguel's signature timing. His road brother never knocked early or late, always precisely when expected. Jack opened the door to find Miguel Ramirez standing in the flickering neon light, his weathered face creased with concern. "Heard you had some excitement at Miller's today," Miguel said, stepping inside without invitation. At 52, Miguel was 10 years older than Jack and carried the quiet authority of someone who'd seen combat in 3 different wars before finding brotherhood with the Hells Angels. Word travels fast. Waitress is dating Tommy's cousin. You know how it goes. Miguel settled into the room's single chair, his dark eyes studying Jack with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read danger in facial expressions. "Want to talk about it?" Jack handed him the letter without explanation. Miguel read it twice, his lips moving silently as he processed each word. "How long since you looked at the postmark?" Jack blinked. In 15 years, he'd focused so intently on Sarah's words that he'd never really examined the envelope. Miguel pulled out a small flashlight and angled it toward the faded postal markings. Crescent Bay, Oregon. Postmarked 3 days after she disappeared. Miguel's voice carried the analytical tone he'd used as an Army intelligence sergeant. "That's a long way from Colorado for someone running scared. Oregon." Jack repeated the word like it might unlock something buried in his memory. "We drove through there once when we were kids. Dad was chasing some construction job that fell through. Eagle's nest and water runs backward," Miguel mused. Sounds like she was describing a specific place, not just being poetic. Jack felt something shift inside his chest. Not quite hope, but the absence of the absolute despair he'd carried for so long. "Miguel, what if that little girl today wasn't just some random coincidence?" "What if it wasn't?" Miguel leaned forward, his expression serious. "But Jack, if Sarah went into hiding because of dangerous people, finding her might put her in more danger. You thought about that?" The question hung in the stale motel air between them. Jack had thought about little else since leaving the diner. Every rational part of his mind knew Miguel was right. But the image of that little girl's innocent face, the casual way she'd mentioned her sister, the impossible coincidence of matching tattoos, it all felt like the universe offering him one last chance at redemption. "She's my sister, Miguel. I let her down once. I can't do it again." Miguel nodded slowly, the gesture of a man who understood loyalty even when it defied logic. "Then we better start planning. If we're going to Oregon, we're going to do it right. No rushing in blind, no amateur mistakes. You think I'd let you chase ghosts alone? Besides, I've got vacation time saved up, and Oregon's beautiful this time of year." Jack felt tears threaten for the first time since Sarah's funeral, the empty casket ceremony they'd held when the police finally stopped searching. Miguel's unwavering friendship had pulled him through the darkest period of his life, and now it would guide him toward whatever truth waited in Oregon. Outside, thunder rumbled across the Colorado plains, and Jack wondered if somewhere in the distance, Sarah might be listening to the same storm. Dawn came too early and too bright, but Jack was already dressed and pacing the motel parking lot when Miguel emerged from his room. They'd agreed to return to Miller's diner first thing, hoping to catch the little girl and her family before they continued their journey. The breakfast crowd was thinner than the night before, just a handful of truckers and early commuters nursing coffee and scanning phones. Jack spotted her immediately, the same bright yellow jacket, the same fearless curiosity as she colored in a book while her parents studied a road atlas. Miguel touched Jack's arm. "Easy, let me do the talking first. You look like you're about to jump out of your skin." They approached the family's booth with the careful deference of men who understood they were strangers asking personal questions. The father looked up first, a man in his 40s, with kind eyes and the soft build of someone who worked behind a desk. The mother appeared more cautious, her protective instincts clearly activated by two leather-clad bikers approaching their daughter. "Excuse me," Miguel said, his voice gentle and respectful. "I'm Miguel, and this is my friend Jack. We were wondering if we could speak with you for a moment about something your daughter mentioned yesterday." The little girl, Emma, Jack remembered, looked up with the same bright smile. "It's the man with the pretty tattoo. Did you find my sister?" The question hit like a physical blow. Jack gripped the back of a nearby chair to steady himself, while the parents exchanged confused glances. "Emma, honey, what are you talking about?" The mother's voice carried concern mixed with curiosity. "The man has the same tattoo as my sister Sarah, the one with wings and a skull. I told him yesterday." Jack's legs nearly buckled. Sarah, the child knew Sarah's name. The father gestured for them to sit down. "I'm David Henderson, and this is my wife Claire. Emma is our adopted daughter. Maybe you should tell us what this is about." Miguel handled the explanation with military precision, outlining Jack's search for his missing sister without revealing too many personal details. As he spoke, Jack watched the Hendersons' expressions shift from wariness to sympathy to something approaching understanding. "We adopted Emma 5 years ago through a private agency in Denver," Claire said quietly. "Her biological family situation was complicated. We were told her older sister specifically requested the adoption to ensure Emma's safety." David pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. "We have one picture from Emma's file. The agency said it was okay for us to keep it so Emma wouldn't forget her family completely." The phone screen showed Emma as a toddler, standing beside a young woman with dark hair and familiar eyes. In the background, Jack could make out distinctive red rock formations and what looked like a wooden sign, though the text was too blurry to read clearly. But he recognized those eyes. "Sarah's eyes. That's her," Jack whispered. "That's my sister." Emma looked between Jack and the photo with the matter-of-fact acceptance of childhood. "Sarah said she had to go away to keep me safe, but she promised she'd always watch over me. She said someday I'd meet her brother Jackie, and he'd have the same tattoo to prove he was family." The adults fell silent, processing the weight of this revelation. Jack stared at the photo, noting how much older Sarah looked than when he'd last seen her. She'd lived 5 more years beyond their last goodbye, had loved and protected this child, had made an impossible sacrifice to ensure Emma's safety. "The adoption papers," Jack managed. "Do they have any information about where she went?" David and Claire exchanged glances, the silent communication of couples who'd been together long enough to hold entire conversations without words. "We might have some information that could help," Claire said slowly. "But we need to be certain this won't put Emma or Sarah in any danger. All we want is to know she's safe," Miguel said. "Jack's been searching for 15 years. He just wants to know his sister is okay." Emma reached across the table and patted Jack's hand with the unconscious kindness of children. "Sarah talks about you sometimes, in my dreams. She says you were the best big brother ever, and she misses your motorcycle rides." Jack bit down hard on his lower lip to keep from breaking down completely. Sarah had shared their childhood memories with Emma, had kept his memory alive in this little girl's heart, even while protecting them all by staying away. "The photo," he said, his voice barely steady. "Can you tell me anything about where it was taken?" David studied the image more carefully. "Those rock formations, they look like something you'd see in Colorado or maybe Utah. But there's that sign in the background. It's too blurry to read, but it might be a park marker or town sign." Miguel leaned closer, his analytical mind engaging. "The lighting suggests late afternoon, and the shadows are falling from the northeast. That narrows down the geographic region significantly." Emma tugged on Jack's sleeve. "I remember that place. Sarah called it our special spot where we went to say goodbye. She said the rocks looked like sleeping giants, and someday, when it was safe, we'd go back there together." The drive to Denver took 3 hours through mountain passes that reminded Jack of childhood road trips with Sarah. Miguel rode beside him, both Harleys cutting through the thin air as they descended toward the city sprawl. The Hendersons had given them the name and address of the adoption agency, Families First Services, along with what little documentation they possessed. Jack's mind churned through possibilities as they navigated Denver traffic. Private adoption agencies operated differently than state services, often with less oversight and more flexible arrangements. If Sarah had specifically orchestrated Emma's placement, she would have needed help from someone inside the system. Families First Services occupied a modest building in a professional district, its exterior painted in calming blues and decorated with photos of smiling children. The receptionist, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes, looked up nervously when 2 leather-clad bikers entered her domain. "We're here about an adoption case from 5 years ago," Miguel said, producing a business card that identified him as a private investigator, a license he'd maintained since leaving the army. "We represent a family member seeking information about a biological relative." The receptionist's expression shifted from wariness to practiced caution. "I'll need to check with our director. Please have a seat." They waited 20 minutes in chairs designed for people much smaller than full-grown bikers before a woman emerged from the back offices. Janet Morrison, no relation to Jack despite the shared surname, appeared to be in her 50s, with graying hair and the careful demeanor of someone who'd spent decades navigating delicate family situations. "Gentlemen, I understand you're inquiring about one of our cases. I need to inform you that adoption records are confidential, and we can only release information to authorized parties under very specific circumstances." Miguel presented the letter of authorization the Hendersons had provided, along with Jack's identification and documentation of his relationship to Sarah. Janet studied the papers with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to legal challenges. "The Morrison case," she said finally. "I remember it clearly because of the unusual circumstances." Jack leaned forward. "What kind of unusual circumstances?" Janet hesitated, clearly weighing professional discretion against human compassion. The biological sister was very specific about her requirements. She needed assurance that the child would be placed with a stable family outside Colorado, and she insisted on maintaining some minimal contact through our office. Contact? Jack's heart raced. You mean she's been in touch? Was past tense. The last contact was approximately 2 years ago, a birthday card for Emma that we forwarded to the adoptive family. Miguel's investigative instincts engaged. Do you still have records of where those communications originated? Janet disappeared into the back office and returned with a thin file folder. Jack could see his hands trembling as she opened it, revealing a collection of documents with significant portions blacked out. Privacy laws require us to redact most identifying information, Janet explained. But I can tell you the communications came from Oregon. Different cities each time: Portland, Salem, Eugene, and the last one from a place called Crescent Bay. Jack's breath caught. Crescent Bay, the same location as Sarah's letter postmark 15 years ago. The biological sister, Miguel pressed gently. Did she ever explain why the child needed protection? Janet's expression darkened. She mentioned ongoing threats from individuals connected to a legal case. She was very emphatic that the child's safety depended on maintaining complete separation from her previous life. But she still cared enough to send birthday cards, Jack said. More to himself than to Janet. She loved that little girl deeply. Every communication expressed how much the separation was costing her emotionally. But she was adamant that it was necessary. Jack studied the redacted documents, trying to glean information from what remained visible. One document caught his attention, a form with a partially visible signature. Most of the name was blacked out, but he could make out what looked like S. Mitch before the redaction resumed. Ms. Morrison, Jack said carefully, if someone wanted to reach the biological sister in an emergency, hypothetically, would that be possible? Janet's pause stretched long enough to suggest she was considering bending regulations. Hypothetically, our agency maintains emergency contact protocols for biological families. But activating those protocols would require documentation of genuine emergency circumstances. Miguel recognized the opening. What if the biological uncle, who's been searching for his missing sister for 15 years, wanted to establish contact for family reconciliation purposes? That would be complex. We'd need verification of the emergency nature, approval from our legal department, and assurance that contact wouldn't compromise the child's safety or violate the original protection arrangements. Jack felt frustration building, but forced himself to remain calm. Every bureaucratic hurdle represented another barrier between him and Sarah, but losing his temper would accomplish nothing. How long would such a process take? He asked. Under normal circumstances, several weeks to several months. However, Janet glanced around the office as if checking for eavesdroppers. If someone were to find alternative means of locating a family member, our agency wouldn't be in a position to prevent that reunion, provided it didn't violate any legal protections. Miguel caught Jack's eye, understanding immediately. Janet was telling them as diplomatically as possible that they were on their own if they wanted to pursue this outside official channels. The social worker's apartment complex sat in a neighborhood that had seen better decades, where peeling paint and broken streetlights told stories of municipal neglect. Jack and Miguel found Carla Rodriguez on the 3rd floor, a woman in her early 50s who answered the door with the wariness of someone accustomed to unexpected visits bringing bad news. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm Miguel Ramirez, and this is Jack Morrison. We're hoping you can help us with information about a case you handled several years ago. Carla studied Miguel's private investigator credentials through the chain-locked door. What kind of case? The placement of a little girl named Emma. Her biological sister arranged the adoption through Families First Services. The mention of Emma's name triggered immediate recognition in Carla's eyes, followed quickly by concern. Is Emma safe? Has something happened to her? Emma's fine, Jack said quickly. I'm her uncle. I've been searching for my sister for 15 years, and we just discovered Emma's existence yesterday. Carla unlatched the chain and opened the door fully, gesturing them inside. Her living room was small but comfortable, dominated by photos of children who'd presumably passed through her caseload over the years. "The Morrison case," she said, settling into a worn recliner. "I'll never forget it. That young woman was so scared, but so determined to protect that baby. I've been doing this work for 22 years, and I've rarely seen someone sacrifice so much for a child's safety." Jack's throat tightened. What exactly was she afraid of? Carla disappeared into a back room and returned with a battered file box. "I keep personal notes on all my cases. Nothing that violates confidentiality. Just reminders of what families need special attention." She pulled out a manila folder, labeled with Emma's case number, and opened it to reveal handwritten notes and photocopied documents. "Your sister came to me through a police referral. Detective Maria Santos, she's retired now, called me about a woman who needed emergency placement for her daughter. Said it was connected to a federal case involving organized crime." Miguel leaned forward, his military instincts recognizing the gravity of what they were hearing. "Federal case. Your sister had witnessed something. I don't know the details, but Detective Santos said her testimony was crucial to convicting some very dangerous people. The problem was, these criminals had connections everywhere. Police departments, courts, even federal agencies had been compromised." Carla pulled out a photocopy of a police report, most of it redacted but with key information visible. Jack could see his sister's name, along with references to credible threats against family members and recommendation for immediate witness relocation. "The detective told me your sister refused to enter traditional witness protection because it would have separated her from Emma permanently. Instead, she insisted on arranging private placement where she could maintain some distant contact." Jack studied the police report fragment, noting the date and case number. "Do you remember what case this was connected to?" "Something involving a man named Valdez. Marcus Valdez, I think. Your sister's testimony helped convict him of racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. But apparently his organization was larger than anyone realized." The name hit Jack like ice water in his veins. He remembered reading about Marcus Valdez in the newspapers 6 years ago, a major federal prosecution that had taken down what prosecutors called the most sophisticated criminal organization in the Southwest. "Carla," Miguel said quietly, "do you know if this Valdez is still in prison?" Her expression darkened. "That's what's been keeping me awake lately. I check on all my former cases periodically, and when I looked into this one last month, I discovered something disturbing." She pulled out a newspaper clipping dated just 2 weeks earlier. The headline read, "Federal Appeals Court orders new sentencing hearing for convicted crime boss." Jack's hands shook as he read the article. Marcus Valdez's legal team had successfully argued that prosecutorial misconduct had tainted his original conviction. While the conviction itself wasn't overturned, his sentence was being reconsidered, with the possibility of significant reduction or even immediate release pending further appeals. "Your sister testified against this man," Carla said softly. "If he gets out, if his organization is still active," Miguel finished the thought, "Sarah and Emma are both in danger again." "That's not even the worst part," Carla continued, pulling out one more document. "I've been getting strange phone calls lately. Someone claiming to be a journalist researching old cases, asking specific questions about Emma's placement, wanting to know where she is now, who adopted her, whether there's been any contact with biological family." Jack felt the room spinning. "Someone's looking for them, or looking for your sister through Emma. Think about it. If you could find Emma through that chance meeting at the diner, other people could find her too. And if they find Emma, they can use her to pressure Sarah into revealing herself," Miguel said grimly. Carla nodded. "That little girl might be the key to finding your sister, but she might also be the bait that draws your sister out of hiding and into danger." Jack stared at the newspaper clipping, understanding that their search had suddenly become a race against time. If Valdez's people were actively looking for Sarah, then every step Jack took toward finding her might also be leading her enemies closer to their target. "Detective Santos," Jack said finally. "Is she someone we could talk to?" "She moved to Oregon when she retired, bought a small place near the coast. Said she wanted to be somewhere peaceful, where she could forget some of the things she'd seen on the job." Oregon. Everything kept pointing back to Oregon. "Carla, do you remember which part of Oregon?" She smiled sadly. "Crescent Bay. Said it was the kind of place where good people could disappear if they needed to start over." Detective Maria Santos lived in a small bungalow overlooking the Pacific. Her retirement haven perched on cliffs that dropped dramatically to the churning ocean below. When Jack and Miguel arrived after 2 days of hard riding, they found her tending a garden that seemed to bloom in defiance of the salt air and constant wind. She looked up from her tomato plants with the alert eyes of someone who'd spent 30 years reading people's intentions in split seconds. Despite being in her 60s, Maria moved with the controlled grace of someone who'd never fully shed the instincts that kept police officers alive. "You're Jack Morrison," she said before he could introduce himself. "You look exactly like your sister described you." The statement hit Jack like a physical blow. "You've seen Sarah recently?" "Recently is relative. But yes, I've seen her." Maria gestured toward chairs on her porch overlooking the ocean. "Sit down. This is a conversation that requires comfort and time." As they settled into weathered Adirondack chairs, Maria studied both men with professional assessment. Miguel Ramirez, Army Intelligence Private Investigator, Hells Angels, and Jack Morrison, Sarah's older brother, been searching for her since she disappeared 15 years ago. Miguel raised an eyebrow. "You've done your homework. I made some calls after Carla Rodriguez contacted me yesterday. When 2 bikers start asking questions about one of my most sensitive cases, I pay attention." Maria's expression softened slightly. "But I also understand family loyalty. Sarah talks about you constantly, Jack. You've never been far from her thoughts." Jack gripped the arms of his chair to keep his emotions in check. "Where is she?" "That's complicated. First, you need to understand what she's been through, and why finding her might not be the reunion you're hoping for." Maria disappeared inside the house and returned with a wooden box that looked hand-carved and well-worn. Inside, Jack could see photographs, documents, and what appeared to be handwritten letters. "Your sister has been in my unofficial protection for 6 years. After Valdez's initial conviction, the federal marshals wanted to relocate her across the country with a completely new identity. She refused because it would have meant never seeing Emma again." Maria pulled out a photograph showing Sarah working in what appeared to be a medical clinic. Her hair shorter and darker than Jack remembered, but her face unmistakably older and marked by experiences he could only imagine. She's been living as Sarah Martinez, working as a nurse practitioner in rural Oregon. Good work, helping people who don't have easy access to healthcare. But she's never stopped looking over her shoulder. Jack studied the photograph, seeing lines around Sarah's eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. Martinez, my maiden name, gave her a connection to law enforcement if she ever needed it, and a reason why someone might help her disappear. Miguel examined additional photographs from the box, images of Sarah at community events, helping at local schools, participating in the kind of normal life that seemed impossible for someone living in hiding. "She built a good life," Miguel observed. "She built a careful life," Maria corrected. "Every relationship measured against potential security risks, every decision filtered through the question of whether it might expose her location." "Do you know what that does to a person over 6 years?" Jack was beginning to understand the complexity of what he was asking for. "You're saying she might not want to be found. I'm saying she's sacrificed everything, including her relationship with you, to keep herself and Emma safe. If Valdez gets out of prison, if his organization is still hunting her, then contact with family becomes a liability she can't afford." Maria pulled out a small bundle of letters, tied with ribbon. "But I'm also saying she's never stopped hoping for a different outcome. These are letters she wrote to you but never sent. One for every birthday, every Christmas, every anniversary of the day she disappeared." Jack's hands trembled as he accepted the bundle. The top letter was dated just 3 months ago, his last birthday. Sarah's handwriting had changed, becoming more careful and controlled. But the emotion in her words was unmistakable. "Jackie," the latest letter began. "Today you turn 42, and I wonder if you still ride the mountain roads we loved as kids. I wonder if you remember our promise by the old oak tree, and if you understand why I had to break it. I dream sometimes that this nightmare ends, and I can call you on your birthday instead of writing letters I'll never send. Until that day comes, know that I love you and I'm sorry for the choice I had to make." Miguel read over Jack's shoulder, his own emotions clearly affected by the raw pain in Sarah's words. "There's something else you need to know," Maria continued. "Valdez isn't just appealing his conviction. According to my sources still in law enforcement, his organization has been systematically tracking down everyone connected to his prosecution. 2 other witnesses have disappeared in the past year. Disappeared how? Jack asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. One was found dead in an apparent robbery. The other simply vanished from witness protection. Federal marshals think she ran, but I have my doubts. Maria's expression grew grim. "Your search for Sarah isn't happening in a vacuum, Jack. Other people are looking for her too, and they have more resources and fewer scruples than you." The journey from Maria's coastal home to the interior valleys of Oregon took them through forests so thick the afternoon sun barely penetrated the canopy. Jack and Miguel rode in formation, their Harleys cutting through mountain passes where logging trucks shared narrow roads with recreational vehicles and the occasional motorcycle convoy. Every mile brought them closer to Sarah, but also deeper into uncertainty about what that reunion might cost. Maria had given them coordinates for the rural clinic where Sarah worked, along with stern warnings about surveillance and the need for extreme caution. At a truck stop outside Bend, they encountered their first reminder that the motorcycle community operated as an informal intelligence network spanning the entire country. Diesel Murphy, a bear of a man with arms covered in club patches from 3 decades of riding, recognized Jack's Hells Angels colors immediately. "Thunder Morrison!" Diesel called out using Jack's road name. "Heard through the grapevine you were heading this direction. Strange coincidence. Someone else was asking about Hells Angels moving through Oregon just last week." Jack felt his blood chill. "What kind of someone?" "Corporate types. Expensive suits, rental cars, city attitudes. Said they were conducting some kind of security assessment for a client. Wanted to know about biker movements, club territories, recent arrivals." Miguel's military instincts immediately engaged. "Did they approach any other clubs?" "Hit every major stop between Sacramento and Portland. Methodical as hell, like they were mapping something." Diesel's expression grew serious. "Word is, they were particularly interested in anyone traveling with specific physical descriptions. Tall guy, dark hair, Hells Angels patches. Sound familiar?" Jack realized they'd been naive to think they could move through the motorcycle community invisibly. If Valdez's people had resources to monitor biker networks, then every stop they'd made since leaving Colorado might have been reported. "Diesel, did these corporate types leave any contact information?" "Nah, but they left an impression. The kind of money they were flashing around, most clubs figured they were either federal agents or corporate security. Either way, nobody wanted to get too involved. They parted ways with Diesel's warnings echoing in their ears, and Jack realized their approach would need to change completely. Direct confrontation with unknown surveillance made their mission exponentially more dangerous. 2 hours later, they reached a small town called Pine Ridge that served as the last supply stop before the remote valley where Sarah's clinic operated. The main street consisted of a general store, a diner, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1970s. Miguel pulled into the gas station, while Jack studied the surrounding terrain through binoculars. The valley beyond Pine Ridge stretched between forested hills, with a single road leading to scattered farms and the medical clinic that had become Sarah's refuge. "Jack," Miguel called softly, "we've got company." A black SUV with tinted windows sat in the diner parking lot. its occupants invisible, but its purpose unmistakable. The vehicle's position allowed clear sight lines to both the main road and the gas station where they'd stopped. "How long has it been there?" Jack asked. "Hard to say, but it's got government plates. Could be federal marshals keeping an eye on Sarah, or it could be something else entirely." Jack considered their options. Approaching the clinic directly would expose Sarah to whatever surveillance was already in place. But retreating meant abandoning their search just when they were closest to success. "There's a back way," he said, remembering the topographical maps Maria had shown them. "Forest Service roads that connect to the valley from the east. Rough terrain, but it would get us close without using the main approach." Miguel checked his watch. "Sunsets in 3 hours. We could use the cover of darkness, approach on foot for the last mile, or we could be walking into a trap. Could be. But sitting here debating it won't make the situation any safer." Jack made the decision that would define everything that followed. "We go tonight. Quiet approach, observe the situation, make contact only if it's clearly safe." They spent the afternoon purchasing supplies and studying the Forest Service maps in detail. Jack's familiarity with wilderness survival from childhood camping trips with Sarah proved invaluable as they planned their route through unfamiliar terrain. As darkness fell, they rode their motorcycles up an abandoned logging road until the track became too rough to continue safely. From there, they proceeded on foot, carrying minimal equipment and relying on Jack's navigation skills to guide them through dense forest toward the coordinates Maria had provided. The clinic sat in a cleared area surrounded by tall pines, its lights visible through the trees long before they reached the perimeter. Jack's heart pounded as he realized that somewhere in that modest building, his sister was working her evening shift, unaware that her past was closing in from multiple directions. Through binoculars, they could see vehicles parked near the clinic, staff cars, patient vehicles, and one black SUV that matched the one they'd seen in Pine Ridge. Miguel touched Jack's shoulder and pointed toward movement in the shadows near the building's rear entrance. Armed figures were positioned in a loose perimeter around the clinic, their professional positioning suggesting military or law enforcement training. "This isn't random surveillance," Miguel whispered. "Someone's preparing for something specific." Jack and Miguel spent the night hidden in the tree line, watching the clinic through shifts while trying to understand the pattern of surveillance around the building. The armed figures maintained professional discipline, rotating positions every 2 hours with military precision that suggested federal law enforcement rather than criminal operatives. Dawn brought clarity to the situation when Jack recognized one of the figures through binoculars, Agent Rebecca Torres, whose face he'd memorized from online searches during the long nights of wondering about Sarah's case. If federal marshals were protecting the clinic, it meant Sarah's cover was either compromised or under immediate threat. "We need to get closer," Jack whispered as the morning shift change provided a brief window of reduced visibility. They used a drainage ditch that ran along the clinic's eastern boundary, crawling through tall grass until they reached the building's foundation. From there, Jack could hear voices through a partially open window, Sarah's voice, unmistakable, despite 6 years of separation. "Understand the risks, Agent Torres, but I won't abandon my patients. These people depend on this clinic, and disappearing overnight will raise questions that could compromise other people's safety." Ms. Martinez. Valdez's legal team successfully argued for immediate release pending appeal. He walked out of federal prison 6 hours ago. "Our intelligence suggests his organization has narrowed their search to this area." Jack's blood turned to ice. Valdez was free, and Sarah was refusing protection because she'd built a life worth defending. "How much time do we have?" Sarah's voice carried the calm professionalism of someone accustomed to medical emergencies, but Jack could hear the underlying fear. "Hours, maybe less. We have reports of unfamiliar vehicles in Pine Ridge, and our surveillance detected 2 unidentified individuals approaching the perimeter last night." Miguel grabbed Jack's arm. realizing they might have inadvertently triggered the emergency response by their presence. Through the window, Jack could see his sister for the first time in 15 years. She was taller than he remembered, her hair darker and shorter, but her posture still carried the determined set of shoulders he'd known since childhood. She wore medical scrubs and moved with the efficient grace of someone who'd found purpose in healing others. Agent Torres. What about Emma? If they're closing in here, she could be in danger too. We've already dispatched protection to the Henderson family. Emma will be safe regardless of what happens here. Sarah nodded, but Jack could see the cost of this crisis in the tension around her eyes. Every choice she made affected people she'd learned to love. Her patients, her colleagues, the little girl she'd sacrificed everything to protect. There is one other option, Agent Torres continued. We received intelligence that Marcus Valdez's brother Jack Morrison has been actively searching for you. If we could arrange controlled contact— No. Sarah's response was immediate and final. Jack's search is exactly what led them here. I won't put him in danger too. The irony cut deep. Jack's quest to reunite with Sarah had inadvertently provided Valdez's people with the trail they needed to find her. His love for his sister had become the instrument of her exposure. Miguel tugged on Jack's jacket, pointing toward movement in the parking lot. 3 black SUVs had arrived, disgorging men in tactical gear who began coordinating with the federal agents already in position. Sarah, Agent Torres continued inside, your brother deserves to know you're safe. This might be our last opportunity for family contact before we relocate you permanently. Sarah moved closer to the window, and Jack could see her face clearly for the first time. She looked older, marked by stress and responsibility, but her eyes still held the fierce intelligence he remembered. My brother deserves a sister who doesn't bring danger into his life. The best thing I can do for Jack is stay away from him. Jack almost stood up then, almost revealed himself to argue with her reasoning. But Miguel's restraining hand reminded him that their presence was already complicating Sarah's safety. A new voice entered the conversation. Male, authoritative, carrying the accent of someone from the southwest. Agent Torres. We've got movement on the perimeter. 3 vehicles approaching from different directions. Coordinated timing, not law enforcement. Through binoculars, Jack could see dust clouds on the access roads leading to the clinic. Valdez's people had found their target. Sarah, we're out of time, Agent Torres said. Emergency extraction now. But Sarah was already moving toward the clinic's patient rooms. I have 4 people in treatment who can't be moved safely. Mrs. Chen is on dialysis, and the Ramirez boy has a compound fracture that needs surgical attention. Those patients will have to be transferred. There's no time for safe transfer, and no other medical facility within 50 miles. If we abandon them now, people will die. Jack watched his sister make the same choice she'd made 15 years ago, protecting others regardless of the cost to herself. But this time, he was close enough to help instead of helplessly watching from afar. Miguel met his eyes with grim understanding. Their reconnaissance mission had just become something much more dangerous and much more important. The sound of approaching engines grew louder, and Jack realized that the reunion he'd dreamed of for 15 years was about to happen in the middle of a gun battle. The first shots came from the east parking lot, where Valdez's advance team had encountered the federal perimeter. Jack heard Agent Torres shouting commands into her radio, while Sarah continued working with methodical calm to prepare her patients for what was coming. Miguel, Jack whispered, we need to get inside. If this turns into a siege, Sarah's going to be trapped with those patients. Miguel studied the tactical situation with professional assessment. Federal agents have good positions, but they're outnumbered and trying to protect a building full of civilians. This could go very badly very quickly. Through the clinic window, Jack could see Sarah moving between patient rooms with a nurse named Linda, both women working to stabilize people who couldn't be evacuated safely. In the pediatric room, A young boy with a cast covering his left leg watched the adults with the wide-eyed fear of a child who understood that something terrible was happening. "Mrs. Chen needs another 20 minutes on dialysis," Sarah told Agent Torres. "If we disconnect her now, she could go into kidney failure." "Sarah, we may not have 20 minutes." The gunfire intensified, and Jack could see muzzle flashes through the trees as federal agents engaged multiple targets approaching from different directions. Valdez had brought enough people to overwhelm the protection detail, banking on the agents' reluctance to risk civilian casualties. A bulletin board near the clinic's main entrance caught Jack's attention. Community announcements, patient education materials, and children's artwork from local schools. Among the drawings, one stood out, a crayon picture showing a family of 3 standing beside a house, with distinctive motorcycles in the background. The artwork was signed Emma H. in careful 7-year-old handwriting, and showed 2 adults and a child holding hands, all 3 figures smiling beneath a bright yellow sun. But it was the details that made Jack's breath catch. One adult figure wore what looked like a medical uniform, while the other had distinctive tattoos covering both arms. Sarah had kept Emma's artwork, displaying it where she could see it every day during her work. The little girl's memory of their family included Jack. Despite never having met him, "Jack," Miguel hissed, pointing toward the rear entrance where a federal agent lay wounded beside an overturned tactical vehicle. "They've broken through the perimeter." Inside the clinic, chaos was erupting as Sarah and Linda tried to maintain care for their patients while Agent Torres coordinated defensive positions. Jack could see Sarah's hands shaking as she adjusted Mrs. Chen's dialysis equipment, the stress finally beginning to show despite her professional composure. "Linda, get everyone away from the windows," Sarah commanded. "Move the mobile patients to the interior storage room, and keep the Ramirez boy's leg elevated no matter what happens." A new voice cut through the gunfire, amplified by a bullhorn and carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Agent Torres, this is Marcus Valdez. I want to discuss terms for a peaceful resolution to this situation." Jack felt ice water flood his veins. Valdez was here personally, which meant Sarah's testimony had cost him enough that he wanted to handle her elimination himself. "Mr. Valdez," Agent Torres responded through her own amplification system, "you're surrounded by federal agents and in violation of numerous federal laws. Surrender now, and you'll be treated according to legal protocols." Valdez's laugh carried clearly across the parking lot. "Agent Torres, I have Sarah Martinez's location. I have overwhelming tactical advantage, and I have all day. What I want is a conversation with the woman who cost me 6 years of my life." Inside the clinic, Sarah stopped working and walked to the window where Jack could see her clearly. Her face was pale but determined, and Jack recognized the expression she'd worn as a teenager when facing down neighborhood bullies who thought they could intimidate her. "Sarah, don't even think about it," Agent Torres said quietly, but Sarah was already moving toward the clinic's front door. "Mr. Valdez, I'll speak with you. But first, you need to allow medical evacuation for the patients in this building. They have nothing to do with our business, Sarah Martinez. Or should I call you Sarah Morrison? Your brother's been very helpful in leading us to you." The words hit like physical blows, and Jack saw Sarah's composure crack for the first time. She'd spent 6 years protecting everyone she loved, only to have her sacrifice undone by the very person she'd been trying to protect. "Let the patients go. Mr. Valdez, this is between us. I'm afraid it's more complicated than that. You see, your brother is here right now, watching this conversation from somewhere in those trees. Jack Morrison, I know you can hear me. Your search for your sister has been quite educational for my organization." Jack realized with horror that they'd been under surveillance far longer than they'd suspected. Every move they'd made since leaving Colorado had been tracked, analyzed, and used to corner Sarah in the exact situation she'd spent 6 years trying to avoid. Miguel grabbed Jack's arm as he started to stand. "Don't give them what they want. Sarah's still got federal protection, and revealing our position won't help anyone. But listening to Valdez use their family connection as a weapon against Sarah was more than Jack could bear. 15 years of searching, and his success had become the instrument of her destruction. Jack couldn't stand the psychological torture any longer. Against Miguel's restraining grip and every tactical instinct that screamed for him to stay hidden, he stood up from the drainage ditch and walked toward the clinic's front entrance with his hands visible. "Valdez. I'm Jack Morrison, and I'm coming out." The gunfire stopped abruptly, creating an eerie silence, broken only by the distant sound of sirens approaching from Pine Ridge. Through the clinic windows, Jack could see Sarah's face transform from resignation to horror as she realized he was exposing himself. "Jack, no!" Sarah's voice carried across the parking lot. 15 years of suppressed emotion breaking through in those two words. Marcus Valdez emerged from behind an armored vehicle, flanked by two men carrying automatic weapons. He was smaller than Jack had expected, but carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd built power through intelligence and ruthlessness rather than physical intimidation. "Mr. Morrison, your reputation precedes you. 23 years with the Hells Angels, multiple arrests but few convictions, and an admirable dedication to finding your missing sister." Valdez pulled out a manila folder and began reading from what appeared to be surveillance reports. "Colorado Department of Motor Vehicles records show you've maintained the same address for 8 years. Banking records indicate modest income, supplemented by occasional motorcycle repair work. Cell phone records show you've called the National Missing Persons Database 43 times in the past 2 years. The detailed knowledge of his life was chilling, but Jack forced himself to focus on the immediate situation. Agent Torres and her team maintained defensive positions around the clinic, but they were clearly outnumbered and constrained by the need to protect civilians. "What do you want, Valdez?" "I want justice, Mr. Morrison. Your sister's testimony sent me to federal prison for 6 years. 6 years of my life stolen because she chose to interfere in business that didn't concern her." Through the clinic windows, Jack could see Sarah still working with her patients, despite the chaos outside. Mrs. Chen remained connected to the dialysis machine, and the young boy with the broken leg was crying softly while Linda tried to comfort him. "My sister was protecting herself and her daughter. Your sister was protecting a lifestyle. She had no right to judge." Valdez's voice carried the cold anger of someone who'd spent years planning this confrontation. "But I'm not unreasonable, Mr. Morrison. I'm prepared to offer you both a choice." Jack waited, knowing that whatever Valdez proposed would come with a price too high to pay. "Your sister walks out of that clinic with me, and I guarantee you'll be allowed to leave Oregon safely. You can return to your motorcycle club, your quiet life, your search for missing people who want to stay lost. And if I refuse?" Valdez smiled, the expression carrying no warmth whatsoever. "Then we discover how much collateral damage you're willing to accept to protect someone who's already sacrificed herself once to keep you safe." The implications were clear. Valdez would kill everyone in the clinic, including the innocent patients, to ensure Sarah couldn't testify against him again. Jack realized that his sister's 6 years of hiding had been preparation for exactly this moment, when all her careful planning would collapse under the weight of impossible choices. "There's a third option," Agent Torres called out from her position behind a federal vehicle. "Mr. Valdez, you're surrounded by federal agents with tactical support en route. Surrender now and avoid additional charges." "Agent Torres, your tactical support is 40 minutes away, and my people have established roadblocks on all access routes. You're operating with limited ammunition and the burden of protecting civilians. I'm operating with superior numbers and the luxury of not caring about collateral damage." Valdez's tactical assessment was probably accurate, Jack realized. The federal agents were playing defense with too many variables to control, while Valdez had planned this confrontation specifically to maximize his advantages. "Sarah," Valdez called toward the clinic, "you have 60 seconds to decide. Walk out with me voluntarily or watch me demonstrate why your testimony was such a costly mistake." Inside the clinic, Jack could see his sister frozen in an impossible position. The patients she'd refused to abandon were now becoming leverage against her continued resistance. Mrs. Chen's dialysis machine beeped steadily, marking time toward a decision that would define everyone's survival. Miguel appeared beside Jack, having abandoned their concealed position to stand with his friend. "Jack, Sarah's not the only one with skin in this game. Valdez made this personal when he threatened innocent people. What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that sometimes the best tactical solution isn't the obvious one." Miguel's military experience had taught him to look for unconventional approaches to impossible situations. Valdez has planned for federal resistance and family negotiation. He hasn't planned for the Hells Angels. Jack understood immediately. Their motorcycle club operated outside traditional law enforcement protocols, which meant they could take actions that federal agents couldn't legally justify. "How many brothers do we have within riding distance?" Miguel smiled grimly. "More than enough to even the odds considerably." The sound of motorcycle engines echoed from the Forest Service roads. Not federal reinforcements, but something Valdez hadn't anticipated in his careful planning. The motorcycle engines grew louder, and Jack realized Miguel had somehow contacted their brothers without him noticing. 12 Harleys emerged from the forest roads in perfect formation, their riders bearing the colors of Hells Angels chapters from across Oregon and Northern California. Leading the convoy was Tommy Iron Garcia, the chapter president from Sacramento, whose reputation for tactical thinking had earned respect throughout the motorcycle community. Behind him rode men who'd served together in various conflicts, both military and civilian, bound by loyalty that transcended law enforcement. Protocols. Valdez's tactical advantage evaporated as he realized his careful planning hadn't accounted for the informal networks that connected motorcycle clubs across state lines. His men shifted nervously as they found themselves outnumbered by bikers who operated by different rules than federal agents. "Mr. Valdez," Tommy called out as he dismounted his motorcycle with deliberate calm. "Seems like you've got yourself a complicated situation here." "This doesn't concern the Hells Angels," Valdez replied. But Jack could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. "See, that's where you're wrong." Tommy walked closer, his presence radiating the quiet authority of someone who'd commanded respect in environments where weakness meant death. "Jack Morrison is our brother. You threaten him, you threaten all of us, Jackie." Watched the tactical balance shift as the newly arrived bikers took positions that effectively surrounded Valdez's people while avoiding direct confrontation with the federal agents. Their positioning was professional, not aggressive enough to trigger a firefight, but coordinated enough to demonstrate overwhelming force. Inside the clinic, Sarah continued her medical work, but Jack could see her stealing glances at the unfolding situation. For the first time in 6 years, she was seeing the protective network that had surrounded Jack during her absence. The family of choice that had supported him through the darkest period of his life. Agent Torres spoke into her radio, coordinating with her tactical team while trying to understand how civilian bikers had appeared in the middle of a federal operation. "Control, I need immediate clarification on rules of engagement with non-law enforcement personnel providing assistance." Miguel moved closer to Jack, his voice low enough that only his friend could hear. Tommy brought the entire council. 12 chapter presidents, 43 full members, all armed and all operating under club protection protocols. Jack understood the implications. Hells Angels protection protocols superseded individual state laws when member safety was threatened. The bikers weren't technically violating federal jurisdiction, but they were prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect their brother. "Valdez," Tommy continued conversationally, "I've been reading about you. Impressive organization, sophisticated operations, good legal representation. But you made one critical error in your planning." "What error?" You assume family meant blood relatives only. See, Jack's got about 200 brothers across 6 states, and every one of them takes threats against family very personally. Valdez pulled out his phone and spoke briefly to someone, presumably calling for additional reinforcements. But Jack could see the calculation in his eyes. Whatever resources he could summon would take time to arrive, and the tactical situation had already shifted beyond his control. Mr. Garcia, your organization's involvement complicates an already delicate situation, Agent Torres called out. Federal law enforcement can't be responsible for civilian safety in an active tactical scenario. Agent Torres, we're not asking you to be responsible for us. We're offering to be responsible for ourselves while you handle your federal business. The distinction was subtle but important. The Hells Angels weren't interfering with federal operations. They were conducting their own separate action that happened to overlap geographically. Inside the clinic, Mrs. Chen's dialysis treatment reached completion, and Jack could see Sarah beginning to disconnect the equipment with practiced efficiency. The elimination of one vulnerable patient improved the tactical situation slightly, but the young boy with the broken leg still couldn't be moved safely. Sarah appeared at the clinic's front window, her medical training allowing her to assess the changed situation quickly. Jack could see her mind working through possibilities that hadn't existed before the bikers arrived, scenarios where she might survive this confrontation instead of simply choosing how to die protecting others. "Jack," she called out, her voice carrying across the parking lot with startling clarity. "I need you to know that everything I did was to protect you and Emma. I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped being proud to be your sister." The words hit Jack like physical impacts. 15 years of suppressed emotion threatening to overwhelm his tactical awareness. But he also heard something else in Sarah's voice, not resignation, but preparation for a different kind of choice. "Valdez," Sarah continued, "if you want to settle this between us, then let's settle it. But these other people, the patients, the federal agents, even the bikers, they don't belong in our business." Jack realized his sister was preparing to walk out of the clinic, not in surrender but in trust that her brother's family would protect her in ways federal witness protection never could. The dynamics had shifted from hostage situation to something more complex, a confrontation between criminal organization and motorcycle club, with federal agents caught between competing codes of honor that operated outside traditional legal frameworks. Valdez seemed to understand that his carefully planned operation had evolved beyond his ability to control through conventional intimidation. Agent Rebecca Torres emerged from behind the federal vehicle, her badge visible and her weapon holstered in a deliberate display of authority without aggression. She approached the center of the parking lot where the three forces, federal, criminal, and biker, maintained their uneasy standoff. "Gentlemen, I'm going to propose something that might benefit everyone involved," she called out, her voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone who'd negotiated through complex situations before. Jack watched Torres with growing respect. She was clearly improvising a solution that none of them had anticipated, trying to find common ground between competing interests that operated by fundamentally different rules. "Mr. Valdez, you want resolution of your grievances against Sarah Martinez. Mr. Garcia, you want protection for your club member. And I want to complete a federal operation without civilian casualties." Torres pulled out a small recording device and held it where everyone could see it. "What I'm proposing is a formal negotiation under federal witness. Everything said here becomes part of the official record, which means everyone's statements carry legal weight." Valdez studied the device with calculating eyes. "What kind of legal weight?" "The kind that could reduce charges if you cooperate, or add decades to sentences if you continue threatening federal witnesses," Jack realized. Torres was offering Valdez a way to back down without losing face. Formal negotiation implied recognition of his position rather than simple surrender to superior force. Tommy Garcia stepped forward, his weathered face thoughtful. Agent Torres, what guarantees do we have that federal protection will actually work this time? Sarah's been hiding for 6 years because your people couldn't keep her safe. Fair point, Mr. Garcia, which is why I'm prepared to offer something unprecedented. Joint protection protocols between federal marshals and recognized civilian security organizations. Jack blinked, understanding that Torres was essentially offering to legitimize Hell's Angels' protection of Sarah within the federal witness security system. It was an acknowledgement that traditional approaches had failed, and that unconventional solutions might prove more effective. What would that look like practically? Miguel asked, his military experience helping him grasp the operational implications. Sarah continues working under federal witness protection, but with enhanced security provided by people who understand motorcycle club networks and can recognize threats that federal agents might miss. Inside the clinic, Sarah had finished stabilizing Mrs. Chen and was helping Linda prepare the young boy for potential evacuation. Through the windows, Jack could see her following the negotiation while maintaining her professional responsibilities. Agent Torres, Sarah called through the clinic's intercom system. What about Emma? Any arrangement that protects me has to include protection for her. Emma's protection is already enhanced. The Henderson family has been relocated temporarily, and we've established monitoring protocols for any attempts to approach her. Valdez interrupted the discussion with barely controlled anger. This is fascinating but irrelevant. Sarah Martinez cost me 6 years of my life. Federal prison, legal expenses, destruction of my organization. There has to be accountability for those losses. Torres turned to face him directly. Mr. Valdez, your organization engaged in criminal activities that resulted in multiple felony convictions. Sarah Martinez's testimony was simply evidence of crimes you had already committed. Evidence. Obtained through entrapment and coercion. Evidence. Obtained through witnessing criminal activity that threatened her personal safety. Torres's voice hardened. But I'm prepared to discuss reduced charges for your current offenses if you're willing to provide information about other criminal organizations. Jack watched Valdez processing this offer, clearly weighing the benefits of cooperation against his desire for revenge. Behind him, his men maintained ready positions, but their body language suggested growing uncertainty about their leader's decision-making. Tommy Garcia addressed Valdez directly. Marcus, I've read your file. You're smart enough to know when tactical situations change beyond your ability to control. Right now, you've got federal agents, local law enforcement en route, and 43 Hell's Angels who are personally invested in protecting Jack's family. Those aren't good odds for anyone, and if I walk away, then you walk away, Tommy replied simply. But if you threaten Jack Morrison or his family again, you'll be dealing with us instead of federal agents. And we operate by different rules. The threat was delivered with casual matter-of-factness that made it more chilling than shouted intimidation. Jack realized his brothers were offering Valdez something. The federal system couldn't, the certainty of consequences that would follow him regardless of legal technicalities or jurisdictional limitations. Sarah appeared at the clinic's front entrance, having made her decision while the negotiation unfolded. She walked toward the center of the parking lot with the determined stride Jack remembered from childhood. When she'd faced down neighborhood bullies twice her size, Mr. Valdez, Agent Torres, Tommy, Jack, she said, acknowledging each of them with the professional courtesy she'd learned in 6 years of medical practice. I have a proposal that might work for everyone. She stopped in the exact center of the group, positioning herself where she could address all parties equally. I'll testify again if necessary, but only under joint protection protocols. And I want my family back, not just Jack, but Emma too. Enough hiding, enough separation, enough letting fear make decisions for us. Jack felt his heart stop. After 15 years of separation, Sarah was choosing reunion over safety, family over the isolation that had protected them all. Agent Torres pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a recent surveillance photograph. A clear image of her walking between the clinic and a small house about 2 miles away, taken with professional telephoto equipment. Sarah appeared healthy and confident, wearing scrubs and carrying a medical bag, looking every inch the rural nurse practitioner she'd become. "This was taken 3 days ago," Torres said quietly. "High-resolution professional equipment uploaded to multiple servers within hours of capture. Someone has been tracking your movements with significant resources." Jack studied the photograph, seeing his sister's face clearly for the first time in 15 years. She looked older, more mature, marked by responsibility and experience, but unmistakably Sarah. The fierce intelligence in her eyes remained unchanged, along with the determined set of her jaw that had gotten both of them through childhood. The metadata from this image shows it was taken from a position approximately 800 meters from your usual walking route, Torres continued. Whoever took it had professional surveillance training and military-grade equipment. Sarah examined the photo with clinical detachment, but Jack could see the violation of privacy affecting her deeply. 6 years of careful anonymity had been stripped away by technology and resources she couldn't match. "How long have they been watching me?" "Based on digital forensics, at least 3 months. Systematic documentation of your daily routines, work schedule, personal relationships. They know where you live, where you work, where you shop for groceries." Miguel studied the photograph's background details with his investigator's eye. "The angle and distance suggest this was taken from the old fire tower on Cascade Ridge. Somebody with significant climbing skills and patience." Tommy Garcia nodded grimly. "Professional surveillance like this costs serious money. We're not talking about hired thugs with binoculars." Valdez remained silent, but Jack could see calculation in his expression. The criminal organization he'd built was clearly more sophisticated than anyone had realized, with resources that extended far beyond simple intimidation and violence. "Agent Torres," Sarah said slowly, "what you're showing me means that isolation and hiding were never really protecting me. If they've been watching for 3 months, they could have acted any time they wanted, which raises the question of why they waited," Miguel observed. Torres nodded. "Our behavioral analysts believe they were using you as bait to draw out other targets. Your brother, Emma, possibly other family members or friends who might provide additional leverage." Jack felt sick as he realized the implications. His search for Sarah hadn't led Valdez's people to her. They'd already found her and were using her as bait to capture him. Every step of his journey from Colorado had been anticipated and monitored. The phone calls to adoption agencies, the visits to social workers, the trail through Oregon motorcycle clubs. Torres continued. "They were guiding you toward this confrontation, making sure you'd arrive at exactly the time and place they wanted." Sarah turned to face Jack directly, and he saw tears in her eyes for the first time since they were children. "Jackie, I'm so sorry. I spent 6 years trying to protect you, and all I did was make you a target." "Sarah, this isn't your fault," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "I made the choice to look for you. Nobody forced me to put you in danger, but if I hadn't testified against Valdez in the first place, then Emma would have been raised by criminals instead of loving parents, and other victims would have suffered." Jack moved closer to his sister, seeing the weight of guilt she'd carried for years. "You saved people, Sarah. You saved Emma. You've been saving patients here. You've been doing exactly what you've always done, protecting people who need protection." Tommy Garcia cleared his throat respectfully. "Sarah, Jack's right. But what matters now isn't who's responsible for the past. What matters is what we do next." Agent Torres opened a tactical communication device that crackled with radio traffic. "Federal tactical teams are 15 minutes out. Local law enforcement is establishing a perimeter around the valley. We have multiple options for how this ends." Sarah looked around at the assembled groups, federal agents maintaining professional positions, Hells Angels bikers ready for whatever violence might be necessary, and Valdez's men growing increasingly nervous as their tactical advantage continued to erode. "Agent Torres, What happens to my patients if this becomes a firefight? Medical evacuation teams are standing by, but moving critical patients during active engagement would be extremely dangerous. Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone. She walked directly toward Valdez, stopping just outside the range where his men might grab her, and addressed him with the calm authority of a medical professional dealing with a crisis. "Mr. Valdez, you want justice for what my testimony cost you. I understand that. But these other people, my patients, the federal agents, Jack's friends, they don't deserve to suffer for choices I made 6 years ago. Sarah, don't..." Jack started, but she held up a hand to stop him. "I'm proposing a trade," she continued. "Me for guaranteed safe passage for everyone else. You get what you came for, and innocent people don't get hurt." The parking lot fell silent, except for the distant sound of helicopters approaching from the direction of Portland. Agent Torres pulled a tactical communication device from her vest, its LED display showing real-time coordination between multiple federal teams converging on the valley. The device represented everything Jack had learned to distrust about government promises: sophisticated technology, overwhelming resources, and the cold calculation that sometimes sacrificed individuals for broader objectives. "Sarah, before you make any decisions, you need to understand what we're offering," Torres said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years navigating federal bureaucracy. "Joint protection protocols mean you and Jack work together with both federal marshals and civilian security to ensure Valdez's organization can never threaten your family again." She activated the device, and Jack could hear radio chatter from tactical teams positioning themselves throughout the valley. Helicopter rotors echoed from multiple directions, and the distant sound of heavy vehicles suggested that federal response was far more extensive than anyone had anticipated. "The device allows real-time communication between you, Jack, and our protection teams," Torres continued. "Any threat, any suspicious activity, any attempt at intimidation gets immediate response from both federal agents and Hell's Angels security." Miguel examined the communication device with professional interest. "Encrypted channels, GPS tracking, emergency activation. Military-grade equipment." Tommy Garcia stepped closer, his weathered face skeptical. "Agent Torres, federal protection didn't work before. What makes you think fancy communication devices will make the difference now? Because this time, we're not trying to hide Sarah from threats. We're eliminating the threats permanently." Valdez's early release was based on prosecutorial misconduct claims, but new evidence has come to light that changes everything. Torres activated a different function on the device, displaying what appeared to be prison correspondence records. "Marcus, your communications from federal prison were monitored more extensively than you realized. Detailed plans for finding Sarah, eliminating witnesses, and reconstituting your criminal organization." Valdez's expression darkened as he realized the implications. "Prison communications are protected by attorney-client privilege. Communications with your lawyers are protected. Communications with other inmates about ongoing criminal activities are not." Torres's smile was coldly professional. "Your planning for this operation was documented extensively, which means we have evidence of conspiracy, witness intimidation, and violations of your release conditions." Jack watched Valdez processing this information, clearly recognizing that his careful planning had been compromised by his own arrogance. The criminal organization he'd built was sophisticated, but it operated within systems that federal agencies understood and monitored. Miguel's military instincts engaged as he studied the tactical situation developing around them. "Agent Torres, if you have evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy, why negotiate at all? Why not just arrest everyone and end this?" "Because arrests don't eliminate organizations. They just create power vacuums that get filled by other criminals. What we're offering is something more permanent." She gestured toward Tommy Garcia and the assembled Hell's Angels. "Your organization has a reputation for handling problems that traditional law enforcement can't address. We're proposing a formal recognition of that capability," Jack realized. Torres was offering something unprecedented, federal acknowledgement of Hell's Angels' authority to provide security outside normal legal channels. It was recognition that some threats required responses that operated beyond conventional law enforcement. What kind of formal recognition? Tommy asked carefully. Consulting contracts for witness protection, information sharing about criminal organizations that threaten your members, and coordination protocols that prevent conflicts between federal operations and club security activities. The communication device crackled with radio traffic as federal teams reported positions around the valley. Jack could hear tactical commanders discussing approach routes, civilian evacuation procedures, and contingency plans for various escalation scenarios. Sarah, Torres continued, this device represents more than just communication. It represents integration between different kinds of protection that can cover threats federal agents miss. Sarah examined the device, her medical training helping her understand both its capabilities and limitations. What about Emma? How does this protect her if she's not directly involved in the security arrangements? Emma gets full family protection, federal monitoring of the Henderson family, Hell's Angels security awareness throughout the motorcycle community, and immediate response protocols if anyone approaches her. Jack felt a stirring of hope for the first time since the confrontation began. The solution Torres was proposing addressed the fundamental problem that had driven Sarah into hiding. Traditional protection had been inadequate because it didn't account for the informal networks through which threats could develop. Marcus, Torres addressed Valdez directly. What you're facing now isn't just federal prosecution for violating release conditions. You're facing war with an organization that has chapters in 48 states and members who take threats against family very personally. Valdez pulled out his own communication device and spoke briefly in Spanish to someone. Jack could see him calculating odds that had shifted dramatically against his favor. Agent Torres, what you're proposing sounds like federal authorization for vigilante justice. What I'm proposing is federal recognition that some problems require solutions that operate outside traditional legal frameworks, Torres replied. The choice is yours. Negotiate a resolution now, or face consequences from both federal prosecution and civilian security organizations. The helicopters were getting closer, and Jack realized that whatever decision was made in the next few minutes would determine not just the immediate outcome, but the fundamental nature of how his family would live going forward. The first indication of how wrong their calculations had been came when Valdez pulled out an object that had no business existing outside maximum security prison walls. The weapon was clearly handmade, a sharpened piece of metal wrapped in prison-issue fabric with additional modifications that spoke to extensive planning and institutional corruption. Agent Torres, Valdez said, hefting the improvised weapon with casual familiarity. Your monitoring of prison communications was less comprehensive than you imagined. Jack felt his blood turn to ice as he realized that Valdez's early release hadn't been just legal maneuvering. It had been orchestrated by a criminal organization with resources inside federal institutions. The weapon proved that his planning had extended far beyond what anyone had detected. Miguel's military instincts engaged immediately, assessing threats and calculating tactical responses. That's not a standard prison weapon. Someone with metallurgy knowledge and access to industrial tools made that specifically for this operation. Valdez smiled, the expression carrying years of suppressed rage and careful planning. 6 years in federal prison provides excellent opportunities to recruit skilled assistants. Welders, machinists, electronic specialists, all serving sentences that can be reduced through helpful cooperation. Agent Torres spoke urgently into her radio, calling for immediate escalation of tactical response. But Jack could see the calculation in her eyes. Federal teams were still minutes away, and the tactical situation had just shifted dramatically. Mr. Valdez, Threatening federal agents with weapons adds decades to potential sentences, Torres said. But her voice carried less authority than before. Agent Torres, my sentence was already life without parole before legal technicalities created this opportunity. Additional charges are meaningless when you're planning to eliminate the witnesses who created the original conviction. The truth hit Jack like a physical blow. This wasn't a negotiation or even an intimidation tactic, it was execution, planned and orchestrated with the methodical precision of someone who'd had 6 years to consider every detail. Sarah, Valdez called toward the clinic, his voice carrying absolute finality. You have 30 seconds to walk out here, or I start demonstrating why your testimony was such an expensive mistake for my organization. Inside the clinic, Sarah was still visible through the windows, helping Linda prepare the young patient for potential emergency evacuation. But Jack could see her freeze as she heard Valdez's ultimatum, understanding that the negotiation phase had ended. Tommy, Jack said quietly to the Hells Angels president, how long since you called for backup? 20 minutes. But the nearest chapters are 40 minutes out, minimum. The tactical mathematics were grim. Federal support was too far away. Motorcycle club reinforcements couldn't arrive in time. And Valdez clearly had resources and planning that exceeded everyone's expectations. Miguel, what are you thinking? Miguel studied the positioning of Valdez's men, his analytical mind working through possibilities that conventional tactics couldn't address. I'm thinking that prison weapons are designed for close quarters combat, not tactical engagements. And I'm thinking that 6 years of institutional planning might have missed some variables. Sarah appeared at the clinic's entrance, her medical bag in one hand and her phone in the other. She was clearly recording everything, audio and video documentation that could serve as evidence regardless of how the confrontation ended. "Mr. Valdez," she called out, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Before we proceed, I want my brother to know something important." She looked directly at Jack, her eyes communicating years of suppressed emotion and regret. "Jackie, Emma knows about you. I told her stories about her uncle who rides motorcycles and fixes things and protects people. She's been hoping to meet you since she was old enough to understand family." The words hit Jack like physical impacts. 15 years of separation suddenly recontextualized as protection rather than abandonment. Sarah had kept his memory alive in Emma's heart while sacrificing her own relationship with him. "And I want you to know," Sarah continued, "that every choice I made was worth it because it kept you safe. If this ends badly, don't blame yourself. Blame the people who built organizations that threaten innocent families." Valdez raised the prison weapon, its crude construction somehow making it more threatening than a conventional blade. "Very touching. But your family reunion ends now." The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously, Valdez moving towards Sarah with the improvised weapon, his men engaging the federal agents with automatic weapons, and additional vehicles arriving from forest roads that supposedly had been secured, but something none of them had anticipated was the sound of motorcycle engines approaching from a direction no one had been monitoring, the old mining road that connected to the valley from the north, where Hells Angels scouts had been positioned since Tommy Garcia's arrival. The reinforcements arrived in perfect tactical formation, their timing coordinated with military precision that spoke to extensive combat experience among the club membership. 12 additional motorcycles disgorged riders who immediately took positions. That turned Valdez's carefully planned ambush into a surrounded kill zone. Jack realized that the Hells Angels had been planning their own operation parallel to federal negotiations, using communication networks and tactical capabilities that operated entirely outside conventional law enforcement protocols. The confrontation erupted into chaos as 3 different tactical doctrines collided in the clinic. Parking lot, federal law enforcement, criminal organization violence, and motorcycle club warfare operating by rules that acknowledged no authority except brotherhood loyalty. The gunfire lasted exactly 7 minutes, ending as abruptly as it had begun, when Valdez's remaining men realized they were surrounded by superior numbers and outmatched by tactical expertise they hadn't anticipated. Jack found himself crouched behind a federal vehicle with Miguel and Agent Torres, his heart pounding as he watched his sister emerge from the clinic with her hands raised but her head high. "Federal agents, stand down. Hell's Angels, hold positions." Agent Torres called through her radio as the tactical situation stabilized. "We have wounded civilians who need immediate medical attention." Sarah moved immediately toward the casualties, her medical training overriding every other consideration as she assessed injuries and began triage procedures. Jack watched her work with professional efficiency, treating both federal agents and Valdez's wounded men with equal care and competence. "Miguel," Jack said quietly, "is it over?" Miguel surveyed the scene with the careful assessment of someone who'd seen combat end in victory that could still turn into disaster. "Valdez is down, his organization is scattered, and we've got federal agents who witnessed Hell's Angels, providing tactical support instead of interference. Yeah, I think it's over." Agent Torres approached Sarah as she worked on a wounded federal agent, her respect for Sarah's medical skills evident in her deferential approach. "Sarah, we need to get you to a secure location while we process the scene and take statements. I need to finish stabilizing these patients first. The abdominal wound needs immediate surgical attention, and the agent with the head injury requires neurological monitoring." Jack felt pride surge through him as he watched his sister prioritize medical ethics over personal safety, exactly as she'd always done. Some things hadn't changed. Despite 15 years of separation and trauma, Tommy Garcia approached Jack with a folder containing what appeared to be photographs and documents. "Thunder, there's something you need to see before we start giving official statements." The photographs showed Emma at various ages, recent pictures that had clearly been taken without the Henderson family's knowledge. School pickup, playground activities, birthday parties. Someone had been systematically documenting Emma's life with the thoroughness of professional surveillance. "Where did you get these?" Jack asked, his protective instincts flaring at the violation of Emma's privacy. "Valdez's vehicle. Seems like finding Sarah was only part of his plan. He was building a comprehensive file on everyone connected to her testimony." Jack flipped through additional photographs showing himself, Miguel, the Hendersons, and even Maria Santos. Valdez's organization had been mapping their entire informal network, identifying pressure points and vulnerabilities with methodical precision. "Tommy, this means Emma was always a target, not just leverage." "Gets worse," Tommy replied grimly, showing Jack the last photos in the collection. "These were taken yesterday at Emma's new school. Someone's been tracking the family even after federal relocation." The implications were chilling. Valdez's resources extended far beyond what federal agencies had detected, and his early release had been coordinated with ongoing surveillance operations that threatened everyone. Sarah cared about Agent Torres, finished coordinating medical evacuations, and approached Jack with her own folder of evidence. "Jack, we recovered Valdez's communication devices. His organization was larger and more sophisticated than our intelligence indicated." She showed him transcripts of communications between Valdez and associates in multiple states, revealing a network that extended far beyond simple criminal enterprise into something approaching domestic terrorism. The good news is that this evidence invalidates his early release and provides grounds for prosecuting his entire organization under federal conspiracy statutes. The bad news is that some of his people are still active. Jack studied the communication transcripts, seeing references to Emma's schedule, Sarah's work patterns, and even his own motorcycle club activities. They'd all been under systematic observation for months. "Agent Torres, what happens now?" "Now we implement the joint protection protocols we discussed, but with significantly more resources. Valdez's communications provide us with actionable intelligence about his entire network." Sarah finished her medical work and approached them with blood on her scrubs, but satisfaction in her expression. Everyone's stable. The federal agent will need surgery, but he'll recover fully. Jack looked at his sister, older, marked by experience, but still fundamentally the same person who'd protected him as children.
Sarah, are you okay?
I'm tired, Jackie. Tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of letting fear make decisions for our family. She pulled out her phone and showed him a text message. Emma's been asking her adoptive parents about motorcycles and tattoos. She wants to meet her Uncle Thunder. The nickname hit Jack like an emotional avalanche. Emma knew his road name, knew about his motorcycle, knew enough about her extended family to be curious rather than afraid. Sarah, what are you saying? I'm saying it's time to be a family again. Real family, not separated by fear and federal protection programs. She looked around at the assembled federal agents and Hell's Angels bikers. We've got more protection now than we've ever had, and Emma deserves to know her family. Agent Torres pulled out the tactical communication device and handed it to Sarah. Your new phone number. Direct line to both federal protection and civilian security. Use it whenever you need backup. Jack realized they were standing at the threshold of the life he dreamed about for 15 years, reunited with Sarah, connected to Emma, supported by both federal resources and motorcycle club loyalty. The federal courthouse in Portland buzzed with activity as Agent Torres guided Jack, Sarah, and Miguel through the complex process of legal name restoration. The document spread across the conference table represented something Jack had never imagined possible: official paperwork that would allow his family to reclaim their identities while maintaining the protection that had kept them alive. Sarah Martinez ceases to exist as of today, Torres explained, stamping the final authorization forms. You're legally Sarah Morrison again, with a documented history that explains the gap years as federal witness protection. Jack watched his sister sign her real name for the first time in 6 years, her hand trembling slightly as she wrote the letters that connected her to their shared childhood. The simple act of reclaiming her identity carried emotional weight that bureaucratic procedures couldn't capture. What about Emma? Sarah asked, her maternal protectiveness evident even in official proceedings. Torres pulled out additional paperwork, adoption modification, documents that would establish both Sarah and Jack as Emma's legal guardians while maintaining the Henderson family's parental rights. Emma Henderson becomes Emma Morrison Henderson. She keeps the family who raised her while gaining the biological family she's been curious about. Miguel studied the legal documentation with investigative thoroughness. This creates multiple layers of protection: federal monitoring, Hell's Angels security awareness, and legal guardianship distributed among people who can't all be compromised simultaneously. Jack felt overwhelmed by the complexity of rebuilding family relationships through legal frameworks. But he also understood that Emma deserved stability and continuity, not just dramatic reunions that might disrupt the life she'd built with loving adoptive parents. Agent Torres, what about practical arrangements? Where does Emma live? Where do we live? How do we build relationships without creating new security vulnerabilities? Torres activated her tablet and showed them a map of a residential community in suburban Portland. Family integration housing, federal program designed specifically for witness protection graduates who are resuming family relationships. The community looked like a typical middle-class neighborhood, but Jack could see subtle security features: controlled access, discreet monitoring equipment, and architectural design that facilitated surveillance while maintaining normal residential appearance. Emma would stay with the Hendersons during the school year, but spend weekends and summers with extended family. Gradual integration that respects existing relationships while building new ones. Sarah studied the housing layouts with practical consideration. What about my medical career? I can't just abandon the patients who depend on rural clinic services, telemedicine consultation, urban hospital affiliation, and ongoing rural clinic support through protected travel arrangements. You continue helping people, but with backup resources that didn't exist before. Jack realized Torres had thought through details that he'd been too emotionally overwhelmed to consider. Rebuilding family relationships required more than just removing threats. It required creating sustainable structures that could support normal life. Torres, what about the Hells Angels connection? How does official federal protection interact with motorcycle club security? Consulting contracts, information sharing agreements, and coordination protocols that acknowledge different kinds of threats require different responses. Torres pulled out additional documents showing formal agreements between federal agencies and recognized civilian security organizations. Miguel smiled grimly. Legitimate businesses providing specialized security services. Tommy Garcia becomes a federal contractor instead of just a motorcycle club president. The transformation represented something unprecedented, formal, recognition that traditional law enforcement couldn't address every threat, and that civilian organizations with specialized knowledge might provide more effective protection than conventional approaches. Sarah signed the last document and leaned back in her chair with visible relief. Jack, after 15 years of separation, are you ready for the reality of having a sister again? And a 7-year-old niece who's been building expectations about her mysterious uncle? Jack considered the question seriously. His fantasy of reunion had always focused on the moment of finding Sarah, not the complexity of building real relationships with people who'd lived entire lifetimes during their separation. Sarah, I'm ready to try. But I'm also terrified of disappointing a little girl who's been imagining her uncle as some kind of heroic figure. Emma's been drawing pictures of family motorcycles rides and camping trips, Sarah said, smiling for the first time since the courthouse proceedings began. Fair warning, she's got some specific expectations about uncle activities. Agent Torres gathered the completed paperwork and sealed it in official folders. These documents go into effect immediately. Sarah Morrison and Jack Morrison are officially siblings again, with legal standing to pursue family relationships under federal protection. Jack felt tears threaten as the bureaucratic language failed to capture the emotional magnitude of what had just happened. After 15 years of searching, hoping, and grieving, his sister was legally and officially part of his life again. One more thing, Torres added, pulling out a final document. Emma's drawing from the clinic bulletin board. She specifically requested that it be included in your family reunification file. The crayon picture showed 3 figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Emma, Sarah, and a tall figure with distinctive tattoos riding a motorcycle. In 7-year-old artistic style, Emma had drawn the family she'd been dreaming of meeting. Jack studied the artwork, seeing his niece's hopes and expectations rendered in primary colors and childhood innocence. The weight of living up to a 7-year-old's dreams felt both daunting and absolutely worth whatever effort it required. 6 months later, Jack stood in the driveway of their family integration housing, adjusting the small passenger helmet he'd bought specifically for Emma's first motorcycle ride. The bright pink helmet, decorated with butterfly stickers, was nothing like the serious black gear he usually associated with riding. But Emma had chosen it herself, with the unerring confidence of a 7-year-old who knew exactly what she wanted. "Uncle Jack, are you sure this is safe?" Emma asked, her excitement barely contained despite reasonable concerns about motorcycle safety. "Emma, I've been riding motorcycles longer than you've been alive," Jack replied, kneeling down to ensure her helmet was properly secured, "and your mom insisted on enough safety gear to protect you if we crashed into a marshmallow." Factory, Sarah emerged from the house, carrying a medical bag and wearing her own riding gear, leather jacket, and protective equipment that looked strange on someone he still thought of as his little sister. But 6 months of family integration had taught Jack that Sarah wasn't the same person who disappeared 15 years ago. Just as he wasn't the same angry young man who'd lost himself in motorcycle club life after losing his family. "Emma, remember what we discussed about hand signals and holding on tight," Sarah said. Her maternal protectiveness balanced with recognition that calculated risks were part of childhood development. Miguel appeared from the garage where he'd been helping. Jack maintained both motorcycles to family-safe standards. Over the past months, Miguel had evolved from riding partner to unofficial family uncle. His apartment in the same protected community, allowing him to participate in Emma's gradual integration into their extended biker family. "Emma, your chariot awaits," Miguel announced dramatically, gesturing toward Jack's Harley, which had been equipped with a passenger seat, additional safety equipment, and modifications that prioritize protection over traditional motorcycle aesthetics. Emma's artwork from the past 6 months covered the refrigerator. In their shared house, drawings that documented her evolving understanding of family relationships and motorcycle culture. The latest picture showed 4 figures on 2 motorcycles, all wearing matching helmets and riding beneath a sky filled with rainbows and birds. "Uncle Jack, when we get back from our ride, can we call the Hendersons and tell them about our adventure?" The question represented the complex balancing act that had defined their family reconstruction. Emma maintained close relationships with her adoptive parents while building new connections with her biological family, navigating loyalties and love with the resilience that seemed natural to children. "Of course, sweetheart, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson want to hear about everything we do together." Jack started the motorcycle, its engine settling into the familiar rumble that had provided soundtrack to most of his adult life. But today the sound carried different meaning, not escape from family responsibility, but integration of his identity as both biker and uncle. Emma climbed onto the passenger seat with careful attention to safety procedures they'd practiced for weeks. Her small arms wrapped around Jack's waist with trust that both humbled and terrified him. The weight of her faith in his ability to protect her was unlike any responsibility he'd ever carried. "Ready, Emma?" "Ready, Uncle Thunder." The nickname still surprised him, coming from his niece's voice. Emma had adapted to using both his legal name and road name, depending on context, understanding instinctively that people could be different things to different communities, while remaining essentially themselves. Sarah and Miguel followed on the second motorcycle as they rode through suburban Portland toward the countryside routes Jack had discovered during months of exploring Emma's new world. These weren't the mountain passes and desert highways of his solo years, but family-friendly roads with scenic views and safe stopping points for a 7-year-old's attention span. As they rode, Jack felt Emma's excitement in the way she pointed at interesting sights and tightened her grip during turns. Her laughter was audible even over the engine noise, and he realized that the happiness he'd been searching for through 15 years of grief and anger had been waiting in the simple joy of sharing something he loved with someone who mattered. They stopped at a roadside park overlooking the valley, where their journey had begun 6 months earlier. The clinic was visible in the distance, still serving rural patients, but now with enhanced security protocols and federal support that allowed Sarah to continue her medical mission without constant fear. Emma pulled out a new drawing. She'd been working on a picture showing their family riding motorcycles toward a horizon filled with possibilities. In the corner, she'd written in careful 7-year-old handwriting, "My family adventures with Uncle Thunder and Aunt Sarah and Uncle Miguel." "Emma, what's this one about?" "It's about how sometimes families get lost, but then they find each other again, and then they have adventures together," she explained with the profound simplicity that children brought to complex emotional truths. Jack looked at his sister, his niece, his brother Miguel, and realized that the ending he'd been imagining for 15 years had actually been a beginning. Some stories conclude with reunion, but the best ones continue with the daily work of building relationships worth the searching. The road stretched ahead of them, leading back toward home and whatever adventures a family of choice might create together.